Welcome back. This is Dan Havey with CF Ninja Hacks, and the other day Susan reached out to me because she had built this site out for a client, and she was having trouble with it because when she resized the page, it moved around quite a bit, a lot more than what she wanted it to do. And so she reached out to me and asked if I could do some things in here to get things to line up a little bit better, get the images to not move around quite as much, get the text to line up better, things like that. You can see as it's moving around. Now, to be honest with you, most people are going to open up a web page. It's going to be one size. That's going to be it. And so the way I look at it is I like to say, what is a page going to look like when you go to 1200 pixels or above, and then 1024 pixels, which is an iPad size. And then, of course, you deal with mobile in the mobile editor, and when that's not going to be what we're going to be talking about here. So this is going to be 100% either iPad, laptop, or desktop that we're going to be looking at. So here is my redesign. You're going to see it looks almost identical, but it's going to work a little bit different as far as sizing goes. So immediately you're going to see, as I bring this in, you're going to see that all the stuff is not moving around. It's going to maintain itself as I bring down this size until we get to 1200 pixels in width, and then the image is going to start to change. And the best way to work on this is to right-click, go to Inspect, and then turn on the, up here in the right-hand corner, make sure this is blue, where it says a toggle device toolbar. So we're going to turn that on. You're going to get a little bar across the top, and you want this to say responsive here, and also here we want 100%. So it's going to look okay on the screen, and then it's going to tell you what your width is here in pixels. And so, like I said, let's pull this out a little bit wider. So now we're out to over 1400 pixels. So normal laptop sizes that people are going to be looking at this stuff is somewhere between 1200 and 1400. I know there are some now that are 2,000-3,000 pixels in width, but I don't think unless you're playing games on it, you're probably not using up the full screen anyway. And so people are used to it in this size range. Plus, this is where most computer monitors are, even on the laptop. So what we're looking at here is 1426, and so we're going to bring this down to a break point that I set at 1200. And so right here at 1200, everything above 1200, nothing will change as far as the image size or whatever. Of course, it'll change the width, but everything else should stay the same. And then as we get below 1200, then you're going to see this image right here will change in size. And it'll keep going down until we get to 1000 pixels in width, and then it will stop changing. And everything will just keep moving across the screen. And if I took this blue off of here, it'd probably help. So here we are way below into the mobile range. So let's go back up to 1024, where it will be for an iPad. So close enough. So here's what it's going to look like on an iPad. So let's scroll down the screen. Everything is very nice, mostly full width. All the images are good sizes. The text is a good size over the top. And so now let's go out to 1200. Take another look at it here. So we're at 1212. That's close enough. So at 1200, everything looks good as well. And as we go out wider, the only thing that you're going to notice in the difference here is that this text may get a little bit wider. And in fact, I guess I even have it set that it really won't get much wider. Let me see here. Nope, I even have it set so it won't go any more than that once you go past 1200. So pretty much anything above 1200 is going to stay exactly the same no matter what. And so then you don't have to worry about things resizing and getting all crazy. So let's go in and let's take a look at the code I had to put in here to do this. So the very first piece of CSS up here at the top is where we have the font face, and Susan went out and found that because that's the font that she wanted, and put in the file name, everything in here perfect. And you always want to put your font face normally at the top of the CSS. And then the lines or the headlines, the elements that are going to use that font face, I always like to put in here right underneath the font face so I don't have to be searching all over trying to find them. So when you set up your font family, you want to put in what this new font is to begin with. So we put that there. Then you want to put in your backup fonts. So in this case here, I looked at Dancing Script. It is a Google font. It's built into ClickFunnels. And so what I'm saying here is if for some reason this Pinkerton script regular doesn't want to run on somebody's computer, then they should default back to this Google font. And if that font won't run for some reason, then they should default back to a Helvetica font. And if that doesn't work, then go to a standard sans serif font, which is going to be built into every single browser out there. So this way you cover yourself just in case the font that you picked isn't working on somebody's computer, that they can still see what's supposed to be on the screen. So the next thing we did is I looked at the logo. So let's go back into Susan's here, and you're going to see one of the biggest culprits of her problem is that as you get smaller, is this logo gets smaller. Well, as it gets smaller, it's taking up less space, and so everything wants to pull up underneath it. So all I did simply was to go in, and I closed out my CSS here. All I did is I went in and I just said, let's give it a fixed width of 175 pixels, and then in that way it won't be able to move at all. So now let's take a look at my version of it, and you're going to see here as we resize the page that this is going to stay exactly the same size as we go back and forth. That way it keeps everything from moving up into its space. So now let's take a look at what I'm calling the rotating text block, which is this area right here. So let's go back into the CSS, and actually let's take this page out and push it all the way over to the edge, and then we will get rid of that, and we are going to leave that, I guess. We'll move this over, and let's go open that back up again. Okay, so for the first thing we have here is call left 165, call inner, and that's right here. And what we did is I had to put in 15 pixels right here just to get this get started away from the edge of the picture. And so if we take that out, you see it's going to move over, and we'll put it right back in so that we have a little bit of space right there. Then we have, in the next thing, we have our headline, which would be this block right in here. So let's open this up. And it's this headline right here. And what I'm saying here is we want to put position relative z-index 9 and then a width of 50% of the viewport width. So no matter how wide this area is here, right now we got 1131. Right now this element right here is going to be half of that. So you got 1131 here. If you look down here, you got 565.5, which is exactly half of the viewport width. So it will come out exactly to half of the middle of the screen here. So that's what we have there. And position relative and z-index, that's just there in order to get this to be proud of it, to be in front of everything else on the page. And then what we have inside of here is we have the element itself, the headline itself, and that's this right here. So again, we're saying we want to position this relative. And the reason we want to do that is when you do positioning, there's like 5 or 6 different ways you can do positioning, but normally you're going to do like relative or absolute. The problem with doing absolute is when you do it, everything else wants to move up into the space because basically it's saying it's not there anymore and move it over here is what you're doing. So I'm absolutely positioning this over here. Doesn't matter where it started, I'm putting it over here, and so everything below it wants to come up into that space. So what we're doing here is we're saying we're going to position this relative, and then we're going to make our changes based upon where it started from, not from where we're going to put it somewhere else. And so what we're saying here is we want a width on this of 436 pixels. And the reason why is I had to calculate exactly how long the longest words were and how much edge I wanted here so that we could keep the B in the same place the whole time, and then the other words would change out. And so we've calculated that width of 430 pixels, and then we're saying, okay, we want to have this come in from the edge left, so we're going to come in from the left edge, and we're going to do a calc function, which is a calculate, so you could do math in here in order to figure out what it is, and we took the viewport width, 50% of the viewport width, so basically the width of this entire element here, and we subtracted off the 430 pixels that we needed over here to cover enough room in order to put the words in. And so essentially that left us with this room right there as the amount we needed to move over from the left edge. So the next question you're probably having is, how do we have this rotating text set up? So let's go back into the CSS itself, not into the CSS, but we're actually going to go into the tracking code this time. So we're going to open that up. And here we have the tracking code, and she had some other code in there, and that code was just fine. I just decided to go back to my standard code that I always use for this type of a rotating text function like this. And it's pretty simple. You just set up some slides. You give it a current value of 0, so we can just add 1, 2, 3, 4 as we step through the slides. And then here are the slides of what we want it to say. And you can do this with images. You can do it with whatever you would like. And then it's just a very simple slider. And then we set an interval here of 2000 milliseconds, which is 2 seconds. And this function right here, all it does is it puts up the most recent slide. And then over here, it adds 1 to that number. So it goes 0, 1, 2, 3, 4. I guess it's just 0, 1, 2, 3, and then it goes back to 0 again because it's zero-based. What do they call it? Zero-based indexing when you're dealing with jQuery. And then all it says is, based upon that, just come in here to the headline that we're working in, and we want the text to be slide current, so it'll be slide 1, slide 2, slide 3. So this here is slide 0, slide 1, slide 2, slide 3, and it just puts it into the code. So that's how that works. Let's go back into our CSS if I can get this to open up. And we will slide that back over to the side. And so let's see. The next line on our CSS was, we did that one and that one. Now we get over here to the right-hand side, and we start looking at the image. So we will inspect the image, and actually we're looking for the element inside or outside of the image that is the parent of the image. And so we got this element here, and all I'm saying is we want a max width of 700 pixels and a minimum width of 575. And I picked those numbers because that's basically what looked good on the screen. So I grabbed the hold of the size of the screen. I went out here to 1200 pixels. And I said, okay, so, well, come on, let's set it there, close enough to 1200. So we got 1200 pixels, and I said, okay, well, 700 pixels is a good width. I just kind of played around with it till I came up with the number I wanted. And then I went down to 1024, and at 1024, I said, okay, I want it to be 575 pixels. That was all of the thought I put into it. But because I knew the two sizes that I wanted, the two breakpoints that I wanted, I was able to very quickly just resize the screen and figure out what was the minimum and the maximum width I wanted this image to be, and then it's going to just resize itself perfectly on the screen. Now there's a different way that you can resize that image, and I'll show you that by turning, I can't turn off the code there. Let me see here. We got to come in here and we got to turn off this code and then into the image, and here, let me see if I can do this. Okay. Okay, there we go. And so what we're seeing on this code down here is, actually let me pull up that other screen just to make it a little bit bigger, a little easier for you to see. So we got here width, again, of 50 VW. So again, we're saying we want this image to be 50% of the viewport width. And then we want the max width on it to, again, be 700 pixels. But we're going to use a new function here. It's called object fit and none. So what it is because this image is actually bigger than the box I'm trying to put it into, because I'm saying give me a width of 50 VW, which is whatever it happens to be, with a maximum of 700. Well, the image width is probably 1,000 pixels or something. So we're saying we don't want it to fit at all inside of there. We want it to basically, because if we were to fit it in there properly, it would actually make it small smaller and shrink it down. What I'm saying is make it as big as possible. See, the image we had before this actually was shrunken down. We took basically 1,000 pixels and we shrunk it into 700 pixel box. Well, here I'm saying leave it at 1,000 pixels. So what it does is it makes this gal bigger than what we had before. And in fact, let me see, I think I can show that here by turning this off. So that's how big she would have been before. Now we make her this big, and frankly, I think that's a better picture, because here I always thought that she was too small. So I put it this way, and we made her bigger. And then again, as we, let's not highlight it here, as we go back and forth, the image will resize itself. So we come up here to 1200, and she's that size, and we'll go down to 1024. And everywhere in between, I think it looks really quite good. So either way, you can use either bits of code there, and you can get a good result. And just in case you're wondering how we had the image sitting where it was, we just simply had a 2-column row, and that we had this a little bit off center. So the center would be right here where the plus sign is. And so we had it like basically 1 notch to the left, and we had this image floating left, and there's no padding at all on the row, so it's going to take up the entire height of that row. So that's how we were able to get that to be able to move along with the resizing of the screen. So let's push this back over again. And now let's take a scroll down and take a look at this. Now, like I said, how Susan had this originally, she had her own section here. So actually, let's reopen this back up. So, I mean, she did not have her own section. She had this all in the same section as above. So she had a row in this section. And again, I didn't like that so much. So what I did is I just came in, made a new section, made it skinnier like this. Obviously, it's going to be centered in the middle. And then I made this, this row should be 100%. Yeah, 100%. Of this section that was, I think, a small section. Yep, it is a small section. And so then this fit in here and looks really nice and doesn't really resize itself at all. So down here, I have a 2-column row. I have an image here, and then a couple, I got another text here and a text element right here, which I can't go over the top of because of the way we had to position it, but I will show you that in a second. So let's turn our CSS back on, and we will scroll down on the page. So this is what I'm calling our hello text block. Okay. So now we come down here. Let's see here. The first one, we're going to say that the column needs to be relative. So let's find that column on our screen. So here we are in the left column. When we come down, we're saying we need this column to be relative. And the only reason we need that is because we're going to absolute position this text element. And in order to absolute position a text element, it has to have an element that has a position of relative as its parent. That's the only reason we have to do that. Then we come into our image, which is right here. And so we got a width of 300 pixels, important, and we want it to float right. So the reason I did the width of 300 pixels and made it important was, first off, it was way too big. And then secondly is because just like we did with the logo up above, I want it to be a fixed width and never move. That way it'll keep it as you're repositioning the size of the screen. The image is not going to resize itself, so it's always going to stay the same size. And we wanted to say float right because, again, it was all the way off to the left edge. And even if I did if I positioned it to the right inside of ClickFunnels element itself, it still didn't work right. So I had to put in this float in order to get it to go over to the right-hand side. Now, the next element we have is this sub-headline element, which is this right here. And let me just come in here and turn everything off and let you see where it started off. And when we turn off that code, you're going to see it pushes it over here to the left. Now, where I actually created this was down here below it. So I had the image element and then I had the text element all in this left column, but because of some of these other elements over here are intruding into this space, is actually pushing it over here and making it appear over here. So what we have here is we're saying we want our position to be absolute. If you recall, we made the positioning up here relative. So when we turn on our absolute positioning, it will say, okay, where do you want this thing? Relative to the column that it's in. So we're in this column inside of the col inner, where it's going to say now, where do you want this thing positioned relative to the element above it that has the relative tag on it. So we're saying we want to move it to the right 207 pixels. So from, we go right here, see on the right hand side where the blue is right here, this says move from this point here over 207 pixels. You always go from the side where the call out is from. So it's right 207 pixels, and then we're going top minus 60 pixels. And that's because we have to be above the top of the original box. See, this image here is also pushed above the top of the box. And so we have to say, or top of the, let me find it here. The top of the element is actually right in here, but we push everything up above it. And so that's why we have to say minus 60. And so, of course, we can just start playing around with this number, and we'll just go, I'm just going to increase the number in the negative, and we're just going to go all the way above even further, but we'll just come back down and we'll say we want this at minus 60 pixels. And there you go. So the next element we need to look at is, and I'd stop for a minute here because I just realized that this text right here, this element right here, doesn't even exist on the page anymore. So I'm just going to turn this off and take that out later. That's what happens when you start redesigning somebody else's site and you start doing your CSS, and then you delete stuff and you get code in there that doesn't belong anymore. So we're going to come down here to this paragraph. So we're right here. We got margin left of 25, margin right of 50. And again, the reason I did that is just to, well, obviously here, give it a little space on the left-hand side, but also a little space on the right-hand side so it didn't run off the edge of the page. And then below this, we have our headline element, and again we got a position relative, and now here we have a z-index of -9. So instead of pulling it in front of the image, what we want to do is we want to push it behind the image, because then when we go beyond that, we're going to say here the L headline portion of it. So right here we're going to tell that we want a left margin of negative 50 pixels. So let's see what that looks like. If we take that out, you see here, pushes it behind there because we go minus 50 to the left, and so it pushes the entire element behind it. And so all this is this is a text element with a colored background. I just turned off the colored background, and so I just made it as a text element, and I did a margin left of minus 50 pixels, and of course I put a bunch of padding around it just to be able to make it look okay on the screen, including we have right padding of 50 pixels, 125 pixels at the bottom, and 75 on the left edge, 25 at the top. So that's how it works like that. So again, what we have here is we just have all in one section, all in one row, 2-column row. We have an image on top of a text element. I made the text element come up and over this picture, and it's going to stay there because the image is fixed with the text element is fixed in its place. So as we resize the screen, nothing is going to change. It's going to stay exactly the same relative to each other. And then on the other side, all we have is two text elements, really, one with a colored background, one without. And then the third element down here is just this button element. And we'll see here, that would be this right here. And all we do with the button element is I did a top margin right inside of ClickFunnels of minus 90 pixels just to pull it up inside. And let me see what else here. We got a max width of 650. Actually, what we have for all of these elements is a max width of 650 pixels. So no matter how wide this gets on the screen, when I first looked at this before, I was like, okay, is it going to go all the way to the edge? Well, it's not going to go all the way to the edge because I fixed the width of all of these at 650, so it can't ever go off the edge. But now let's look at one thing. How I also have this set is that this right here is going to always go all the way over to the edge. See, we're always going to have that go to the edge, but the text inside of it will not go over to the edge. Now, if we continue down the screen to our very last element, let's see what we did there. So again, we did our column left as being relative. So let's just inspect this and find that column left. And so here's the column inner. We made that, or we made the column left in this case. We made that relative. And then we got our image. So we need to go in here. We find our image. Again, the same thing as above. We did our width of 400 pixels and we floated it to the right just like above. And then for the headline, again, below it, we made it absolute. Right 223, top 160. Again, it lives down here. This is where it was created, was right down here in the same column as this image. And we just pushed it up and over to the left by setting our right number. You always push away from the opposite edge is how you normally would do that. And then we got here, the other thing, we have max width of 550 on our text and padding right of 50 pixels. So again, we're going to keep this, and this part right here this is actually the background. Let me find the entire row. That is the background color for the row. We can turn that off. So we set the row having that background, and all we did then is with this element, we just pushed this element up out of the top by using top negative margin on it. And we'll go here and find that. Yeah, that's the wrong element. Let's go to this one. There we go. Top minus 30. So I just made it minus 30, goes out the top. And it's always going to stick there no matter what when we move this back and forth. The other text may resize. Now, if we went really, really small, but again, once you get below 1024, you're really looking at mobile at that point anyway. So that was a real quick rundown on this. The other thing is all stuff you've seen before, where we set up our page. The entire page we set here to 100% width, and then also the columns, the rows, inner content. We took out all the padding. We took out even more padding here. And then in, for some reason, ClickFunnels at the 1170 breakpoint, I think they actually put in an additional 10 pixels. I never could understand that. So you do this in order to kill it by making this unset. It will take out that added padding. So that is it. I hope I didn't go too fast. I hope I explained this relatively well. And again, if you have any questions, feel free to reach out. Till the next time, have a great day.